Good morning, Year 6, and welcome to Tuesday, the 2nd of March literacy lesson. Right, so first things first, open your books, write the date and today's learning objective to take notes and research. Pause the video while you do that. Right, so in the back of your today's objectives are to research and to take notes, and this is for our explanation of evolution. So first things we need to do are define and explain adaptation, variation, and inheritance. We're going to do that together, and then research how these three processes are linked to and cause natural selection. Then we're going to research an example of evolution or natural selection in an animal. We need to make sure that we're writing these in bullet point notes and in key sentences, copying the key information. Right, so just to remind you, we are going to write an explanation text this week about the process that is going to explain the process of evolution. So our research today needs to look at how evolution works and an example of evolution. And it's very similar to yesterday's lesson, so we'll be able to use some of the examples from yesterday. So by the end of today's lesson, you will need to be able to understand and explain evolution or natural selection. Okay, that's just another word for evolution, really. Right, so in your packs, right at the back, you should have, it says Tuesday, Research Evolution. Now, before we go to that bit, just going to have a look at some definitions of inheritance, variation, and adaptation that we're going to work on together. So just in your books, don't write definition, just underneath the title, write inheritance. So if you can remember what inheritance is, that's excellent. So try and explain it in your own words. But if not, inheritance is where genes are passed from your parents to offspring. Okay, so from parents to children, and so on. And so just to simply type that up, and there we go, inheritance is where genes, and then I'm going to put a slash and just put characteristics. I'm just going to move that up, are passed from parents to offspring. Okay. And then sometimes these genes can randomly mutate, and I'm just going to put change there. All right, so that's inheritance. So it's where things are passed from parents to their offspring. As some of you defined inheritance as when somebody dies, you get all their stuff if it's left to you. That is the term of inheritance legally, but scientifically inheritance is to do with genes, DNA, and genetic information. So variation then is when parents have two offspring and those offspring are different. So when parents pass on their genetic information, you get 50% of your mum and 50% of your dad. But your brothers and sisters might have a different 50%, so it won't be exactly the same as your 50%, unless of course you are identical twins. So variation are just the differences between siblings. Now to write that, so I'm just going to put when siblings inherit characteristics, genes, in other words, from their parents, they get 50% from their mum and 50% from their dad. Variation is the difference in siblings because they inherit different. Now it's not different, it's like a different combination of genes from both their mum and their dad. So let's say, for example, take me and my brother. Me and my brother, we were both incredibly good at maths. However, I've got brown hair and my brother's got blonde hair. My mum and dad are both very good at maths, so it's likely that we both got similar characteristics there, but then we've both got different characteristics because my mum's blonde but my dad's got brown hair. Okay, so I would have inherited the hair gene from my dad, and my brother would have inherited the hair gene from my mum instead. Now, adaptation. This is where we looked at things yesterday. So this is where things change because of their environment. So this is to do with inheritance as well. So it's where genes and characteristics give an animal an advantage to living in an environment, so they start to adapt. Okay, so this is where an animal inherits an advantageous mutation which makes it easier to live in an environment. I've done it again, I've spelled environment wrong. I don't know, I always spell that wrong. Whenever I'm typing environment, I always put environment instead of, I always mix up the R and the O all the time when I'm typing. So this is where an animal inherits an advantageous mutation which makes it easier to live in an environment. This means it will pass this mutation onto its offspring, while other animals without this mutation will die. Okay, there we go. So these are some very, very important definitions that you probably need to make sure that you've got written down for this morning. All right. Right, so now what I'd like you to do is have a look at the information that I've given you today. Now, I've put this, and then I've put an easier version of this as well, which looks similar to this. Okay. Oh, well, that's got quite a good definition there. Something changes for the better to suit something new or different. Yeah. So this just gives you a very basic explanation of what to do, but I'm going to go from this one today. So what I'm going to do now, what I would like you to do now is I'd like you to pause the video and read the introduction, read natural selection there up until this part. So don't read this bit just yet, but we'll go back to this. Okay, so pause the video while you do that. Okay, now that you've read that, you should have a basic grasp of how evolution and natural selection works. Alright, so what we need to do now is go on to a new page and write the subheading, what is natural selection? And in this bit we're going to research how it works from what you've just read. So here are some, remember for our explanation text we need to constantly use scientific vocabulary. These are the sorts of words that you should be using today, particularly mutation, genes, and inherited traits as well. So let's have a look at these. So the first thing I'm going to do is just define evolution. So evolution is where things slightly change to adapt to their environment over a very long period of time. Okay? So that's my first little bullet point. Rather than go backwards and forwards, I'm just going to go on to this one. All right, and you can see that's what it says there. Oh, organisms would have been a good word to steal in there. Is where organisms slightly change. Very scientific word there. Slightly change to adapt their environment over a long period of time, and then they do this through. What does it say there? Inherited adaptations that make it easier to survive. They do this through inherited adaptations which make it easier to survive. Alright. There we go. Right, let's have a look at what else we've got. Alright, so now it's going to go through natural selection. So evolution happens as a result of a process called natural selection. Natural selection happens because of the basic fact that all organisms within have random differences. Yeah, we probably should mention that about mutations actually. So happens because of mutation. And so at this part, I probably want a little bit of an explanation about mutation. So I'll let you carry on with that, and then I'm just going to carry on for a little bit more. So what you would have to do then is have a read through this and pick out the key information that explains evolution. So we've got about mutations here, about making it easier to survive, and then this part here is very, very important about the fact that these mutations help an animal live over an animal that doesn't have that mutation. Okay, so where's that bit there? And then explain about, yeah, so you've got the mutation, and then what you need to maybe do is explain, I'm just going to write that here, so I wouldn't copy this if I were you. Explain, what on earth is this doing? Stupid thing. Explain why having a good mutation is an advantage, and then explain how that mutation is passed on. So that bit is the reproduction. So if an organism has a mutation that gives it an advantage, they survive, and then they pass that on. Okay, they pass that on to their offspring, who then pass that on. Okay, all right. Now sometimes, and this is something to get in as well, this is called survival of the fittest, and what it means is that that animal is the best fit for the environment that it's in, so it survives. But an animal that isn't a good fit for that environment will not survive, will get eaten, or will not be able to pass on its DNA. Right, so that's what you need to do for this bit. So I'm going to get you to pause the video, explain why having a good mutation is an advantage, and explain how a mutation is passed on. And then probably as well explain how this leads to a different species. All right. Okay, pause the video while you do that. Okay, now that you've done that, we're going to have a look at an example of evolution. So what I'll need you to do for this, probably just re-pause your video and read from when was the theory of evolution formulated. So it's going to give you some information about the Galapagos finches there as well. And then I've put mine in from the other day as well as a slightly easier version to read through there. So you might want to read through the blue one first and then read through this part just to supplement your information. Okay, pause the video while you do that. Right, okay, so now for your example of evolution. Now at this part you can do one of two things. You can research your own example of evolution. One very good example to do is birds and how birds are originated from dinosaurs. You have to obviously do that on Google. Or you could use the example that we've got already, which is the Galapagos finches. So I'm going to just do that and put a little title of Galapagos finches. Now, we don't need, the important thing that I can't stress enough for you today is that we don't need all of the information from our sheet in the back, okay? And we need your description of the Galapagos finches, okay? So what you'll notice is that you're starting to maybe repeat some of the language that you've used in here, okay? About talking about natural selection and things like that. So the first thing I would maybe do is looking at how having two Galapagos, I'm just going to call them GFs because to write a bit quicker, and this is note. Two Galapagos finches have offspring which are similar but unique in different ways. And then one of these offspring had a large, strong beak. One of the offspring, can't spell properly, had a small, weaker beak. And then, I'm going to put on or rather than on, in the environment, bad weather meant there was, spelled the wrong there was a shortage of food. Meant there was a shortage of food, so the finches had to eat larger and stronger seeds, because the usual seeds didn't grow. So this is an example of the environment changing. All right. So this meant that the offspring with a large, strong beak could crack open the larger, stronger seeds much easier. Now, I've just realised I probably need to go back and say at this point, one of these offspring had a small, weaker beak, and then I'm just going to put in brackets one of these offspring had a large, strong beak, and I'm going to put a random mutation in there. Okay. Now, it's important to realise that random mutation gave it an advantage in this environment. Okay, so in this environment it was an advantage. So it meant that the offspring with the large, strong beak could crack open the larger, stronger seeds much easier, because of their larger, stronger beak. They had an advantage, or an advantageous adaptation that they inherited from their parents. Okay, so, and then obviously because that means they have that adaptation, this meant they survived while smaller beaked finches died out. Okay, right, don't think I've put, I'm just going to have to duplicate the page. Alright, let's get rid of all of that. Don't worry, it's on that page there. So then the larger beaked finches, sorry, I need my comma after them, reproduced and had offspring with a larger beak, which could eat the larger seeds. Now, it's important to remember at this point that not all of their offspring will have had a larger beak. Some of them will have had a large beak, some of them will have had a small beak. So not all of the offspring would have had a larger beak. Some would still have a smaller beak, unless it was a really strong mutation, but that's highly unlikely. But that's like degree stuff. That's me going back to what I used to study. Now, the final points we need to put here. Eventually, the smaller beaked birds, smaller beaked finches, would have become extinct, leaving only large beaked finches. This is called evolution by natural selection and led to a new species. Okay, right, so that is basically, for the Galapagos finches, the story, and it's also a nice way of seeing your process of evolution. All right, so what we are going to do tomorrow is write about what natural selection is, and then give a very good example using finches or using another animal that you decide to use. Okay, right. Good luck, Year 6, and I will see you tomorrow, ready for writing.